It's much more important to think about all the partnerships that you could build and leverage people's strength to get there and not try to do it all by yourself.
Hey, Ram, welcome to the Grow Everything podcast. What's going on in your world?
Oh, Carl, spooky season is upon us. I am living my dream. I love Halloween and the fall season. How about you? Are you getting ready for Halloween or are you dressing up?
I don't think I'm dressing up, but my wife and a bunch of her friends are going as band book. So I may rally. And I think the plan is to go to the Village Parade, the West Village Parade, which is a huge deal in New York City. And if I do go and I do rally, I plan to go as Catcher in the Rye, which is a banned book.
Look at me living in my bubble. I did not know Catcher in the Rye was a banned book. I had to read that for school. That was weird.
Yeah. Well, youth rebellion is banned in many places. And I think, the main character hires a prostitute at the end and he's underage. So I think there's a lot of things in there that are just, potential for banning.
Yeah, I
But
totally
when you
missed
look,
that part of the book when I was
should go
younger.
back and read it.
Yeah, I think I should. I did go back and watch Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory with my son, which is an amazing Halloween movie because it's so imaginative. People are, wearing different. I mean, in the movie, that's their uniform at work, but the Oompa Loompas have an outfit, and the music, everything's so imaginative. The first Willy Wonka, there's been other ones, but this is the one with Gene Wilder, made in the '70s, and I rewatched that, and I was like, oh, there's so many things that I missed again, and now that I'm older and have experience, I'm like, wow, this is incredible! Like, what an incredible piece of work, and my son loved it, which was
Yeah.
great.
Do you know that, I don't know, he might be a little young for this, but The Twits, which is also a Roald Dahl book, is now on Netflix. And that looks pretty intense and great. And The Twits is such a good story. So he's getting to the age where, he will really love those books. I was like, Fabulous Mr. Fox or whatever that one's called. And The Magic Finger, I remember the kids really being into. All of them are super short, but Twits on Netflix looks amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely gonna check that out. But my son recently, he's been kind of scaring me because he's 4 years old. And the other day, it was like morning time, and he came to me in my room and he snuggled with me. He was like really calmly was like, "Mom, I had a nightmare last night." And
Oh, geez.
oh my God, my poor little boy had a nightmare. I'm like, what was it about? And he was like, I can't tell you because it's so sad. I don't want to make you sad.
Oh, my God.
And I was like, what did this boy experience? And I was like, and he's like, he's like, I can't tell you, but it was a nightmare. And I'm like, well, I'm like, you can talk to me, tell me things. If you want to get it off your mind, just talk to me about it. There's nothing more terrifying than children in Halloween,
Yes. Yeah.
especially when they're calm and they like stare at you. And it's like, whoa, it's like, what's going on, kids?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, speaking of children and Halloweens, I rewatched, I probably mentioned this a few episodes ago. So the big kind of horror thriller of the summer was Weapons,
Mm.
which I rewatched last night, which also involves children. And it was super interesting to watch it again because there were details that you missed the first time because you're just like on the edge of your seat.
Hmm.
But speaking about children, I mean, like the kids are, I think, like third graders. The setup, and I'm not going to spoil it, is that these kids from one classroom disappear, all but one. And then later on, as the story unfolds, you're kind of watching the kid who doesn't disappear and like the heavy world that he's living in. So having kids, them being afraid, the uncertainty of the world, all those things are very scary.
Oh, Carl, yeah, I'm getting chilled. I don't like being scared. I used to like being scared. I watched all the scary movies when I was younger, but not anymore. But there has been some funny Halloween things going on, and we just had to mention this because you shared this with me on our chat. SNL had this skit called Snack Homies, and it was really young kids. They were like 12 or 13, so maybe Gen Z, Gen Alpha, and they were, four of them speaking like Gen Z speak about snacks and friendship, which are two amazing topics. And like, Carl, we should do another podcast.
Yeah, and we should do it the way they did it, where they did it as a round table. They had four kids around the table, and then the guy who plays President Trump showed up and got into the conversation. I think we should do something similar. Four of our friends, four of our besties on Grow Everything, talking about snacks and food and biotech.
There we go. That's a niche. That's a niche. And especially now that we are on video more, that's something that we decided, hey, look, we live in a very visual world. Let's get our videos up. you guys will notice that our backgrounds are changing. We're still experimenting where the best places. Paul and I right now are in separate places, but why not get together? Let's see, let's vibe out. Let's vibe out in the podcast. Stay patient with us. Enjoy the difference right now, but then we'll get more consistent, hopefully, in the future. So stay tuned for that. But what else? What other spooky things? We have an exciting episode coming up. Before that, let's talk about what's been going on.
Well, it's funny because you had put into the notes, is a zombie apocalypse possible?
I don't know.
Why were you asking that question? Just because it's Halloween?
Yes, but it's been in my mind. It's something that I talked to my friends about at parties. And actually, one of my friends brought it up, and they're like, if a zombie apocalypse happened, like right now, you just got an alert on your phone and it said, head for the hills, what would you do? And I'm like, oh my gosh. And it's like, it's this thought experiment. We all talk about what we would do. And then I was like, all right, let me just ask ChatGPT, like, is it possible to have a zombie apocalypse? Because then maybe I should prepare for it. And it said no at first, but then it was like, well, there are these different possibilities for zombie-like effects.
Well, the zombie-like effect is basically the storyline for The Last of Us. It's like a fungus that makes people attack each other. And that is like a zombie apocalypse trope, but go ahead.
Yeah, well, that's what it said. It said there's, I guess, 4 possibilities. It said like rabies could induce zombie-like behavior. And then the Toxoplasma gondii. So that's what makes rats lose their fear of cats. And then,
oh, wow.
And then
they, yeah,
yep, that's real and could be adopted in humans and mess with our behavior. And then the other thing is, like you said, the cordyceps, the fungus. And then it was like, but those cordyceps, they don't thrive in human body temperature because we're warmer than insects. So it wouldn't survive. And it also said our immune system is too complex. We would just, knock out the cordyceps. But then I was like, well, could cordyceps evolve to withstand warm body temperatures and the immune system? And I was like, well, yeah, it could. And I'm like, all right, here we go. We just got to be careful because then it started, then I call it ChatGPT Nova. Nova started helping me because it started realizing like, oh crap, like this could happen because climate change could cause these fungi to withstand heat. And it has happened in different organisms were getting affected by fungi that previously never affected them, but these fungi then are able to withstand heat. So that's a little spooky Halloween thought experiment for you guys. I just wanted to put that out there. And I do have a plan, but maybe we can talk about that later. Or call us, write to us.
And let us know.
Let us know. Do you need a plan to survive the zombie apocalypse? Download this PDF. Send us your email address.
Yeah, I mean, I think zombies go in and out of being trendy. Walking Dead had made it popular. 28 Days or 28 Years Later just came out.
Yeah.
And I think I'm like, what does this reflect about our society? Because the zombie apocalypse is like a metaphor for societal breakdown, economic uncertainty. And, I watched this movie that just came out on Netflix, and I think it was the #1 movie this weekend, House of Dynamite, which is really about, a nuclear attack from an unknown source in the Pacific. And it was pretty scary. I mean, but I have to say it was like very tense. It was very well done. But at the end of it, I was just like very dissatisfied with the ending. It just didn't vibe for me. And Catherine Bigelow, who has directed a lot of movies, The Hurt Locker, among other ones, I think she's a very good director. But for some reason, this one just didn't work for me at all.
That's your movie review segment of the Grow Everything podcast.
Oh man, I watched a lot of movies this weekend. And it wasn't like I was at home, but it was just like I turned things on, and then the next thing I know, the movie's off or done. But in other news, I don't know, did you see the Beyond Meat stock run up last week?
No, what happened?
So Beyond Meat went from something like 52 cents to over $8.85.
Wow.
Like a 16,000% gain in 4 days. And, I think it was a target of meme stock traders. I don't think it's at that point anymore. But, it resulted in like incredible volume of shares over just a few days. And that always is like, zombie trading.
Well, there we go.
Is what it reminds me of.
Bring it back to the Halloween theme. Oh my God.
I'm bringing it back to Halloween and zombies.
Yeah, well, Beyond Meat, I mean, they What do they have? Do they use heme? I know Impossible Burger uses heme, so they have to, biomanufacture that, I believe. So I don't know if Beyond Meat has a biotech angle, but
No, they don't.
no, they don't. Okay, well, that's fine. So we are talking about biomanufacturing today, and I'm really excited because we had our report on reports a couple episodes ago, and one of those reports were wait for it, the graveyard report. Woo!
Perfect report to talk about Halloween week.
Yes, it was perfect. We're like, we have to talk about it. I wanted to dig in deeper because it is about failure of certain companies or certain industries of trying to leverage biomanufacturing to replace petrochemical based products, biofuels, specialty chemicals. And we wanted to dig in deeper because we learned lessons. When you have failure, you learn lessons. And our friends at First Bite, Veronica Breckenridge, they wrote a great report being able to highlight not only what has happened in the past, but what are some solutions for the future. And we wanted to dig the grave deeper in the graveyard report. So why don't we quickly do an intro?
Sure, absolutely. So we have had Veronica Breckenridge on the podcast before. She introduced us to First Bite and their fund. They're focused on helping companies scale. So if you're a startup that maybe has gone through an incubator and accelerator and you have some funding, but you're still unsure or uncertain about how to scale, First Bite would be a place that I would be looking at. And I hope, Veronica, you don't mind me characterizing you guys that way. So when the Graveyard Report came out, we were very excited about it. We ended up reporting on it in our report on reports, as you mentioned, Iram. And so now we're going to just let Veronica talk about the report itself.
All right. So let's get started on this spooky but informative episode. Veronica Breckenridge, welcome back to the Grow Everything podcast. Hello.
Hi, it's great to be back.
Yes. Oh, God, we had to have you back because we just did this report on reports episode where we were talking about all these bioeconomy, biomanufacturing reports that came out and talked about various different perspectives, whether it was how much money was being put into the industry, the new types of innovations that have been happening, just global perspectives, and sometimes coming from management consultancies, so Capgemini, McKinsey, they've all kind of dabbled in this. But your report by far has been, I think, the most eye-opening because it's titled the Industrial Biomanufacturing Graveyard Report. And because 'tis the season of Halloween, we wanted to talk about it because failure can be a scary thing, but it can also be a very valuable thing. So thank you again for coming on the pod.
Oh, it's a pleasure. And I completely agree. I think part of the reason we named it the graveyard, in fact, we had an internal debate whether we should, because some people were saying, well, would that be too gloomy for this industry because we're trying to get people more excited? I said, well, there's a benefit to know mistakes that you made. Hopefully that make us wiser and better at pursuing it now.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm sure you've seen this because your background spans a lot of different tech heavy industries. And you've worked with Apple, you work with Tesla, and now you're in bioindustrial investing. So first, before we get into this report, and for those that haven't listened to your previous podcast, which we encourage everyone to do, the previous episode when you were on the Grow Everything podcast, can you tell us what pulled you from scaling tech companies to trying to resurrect the future of biomanufacturing?
Yeah, I mean, the story is actually really interesting. But for me, because I've been through so many really huge transitions, like being at Apple, where it was transitioning to a mobile world from, a fixed line world in terms of communication, and Tesla, basically electrification of the transportation. So I had identified a number of key points where inflections happen, which is where value gets created. One of the single most important thing is a structural, I would say, inefficiency that you can identify. And when you look at these technologies enable you to capture that, right? So this was back in 2020. I got to meet Ginkgo Bioworks. And I have to say, early days, really, Ginkgo taught me a lot about what's happening in synthetic biology and with biology in general. And the structural sort of inflection point, I would say, is I had not realized how much cost and speed that biology has been improved, right? 3 million times in terms of cost in the last 25 years. And then in terms of accelerated time, right, when the first time we sequenced the human genome took, I think, something like 9 or 11 months. Some people say it's even longer, 2 years, because it depends on how you count when you started. But now it literally takes just a few hours. So these acceleration are exponential. They're faster than Moore's law. That's created the economics are becoming much more attractive today using biology than ever before, right? And that continues to go down because we have AI and all these to accelerate. So for me, that was the transformation moment to realize how fast and how quickly we can iterate biology. And therefore, something is going to be created because of this inefficiency. The second thing I think talking with Ginkgo made me quickly also realize is, and this is where it is different in scaling this industry and where my industrial bioengineering comes in, is scaling this is a lot about manufacturing. In fact, the scaling is from lab to actual manufacturing is really critical for commercialization success. That has been something that has been not as well understood or done prior. And part of it is because really pharma was just, you had a lot of margin to explore. So you had latitude to fail and try it many times. The second is because a lot of these scientists simply, they are scientists. That's why they've never seen a manufacturing environment. So they don't know how to really scale. So that was something I identified also as an issue with this industry and the failures. And part of the reason I found love for it is that it happens, there's structural inefficiency, and it's something I actually know something about. As an industrial engineer and someone who worked with a lot of manufacturing companies, this I know how to solve.
Yeah, yeah. And that's great because we oftentimes on this podcast bring on entrepreneurs or investors that come from other industries. And it's a beautiful thing to see how they can take the learnings from one industry and bring it to another. And yes, biomanufacturing, of course, it's been around. Beer, yogurt, kombucha, okay. But now with all of these tools to, like, I don't even want to use the term like throw fuel on the flame. That sounds really dark, but this is a Halloween themed episode, so that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, this is so great to hear your perspective, Veronica. The Industrial Biomanufacturing Graveyard, it's a fitting, haunting title, and it's accurate for our Halloween episode. But what does this exactly mean?
My personal view is I hope most of the startups will really read it, because one thing you learn, and I think last time we ended, it's not the technology that wins, right? It is 80%. I mean, even in our study, more than 80% of these companies fail. It's not because technology. It really isn't, right? It's their go-to-market. It's their commercialization path. It's about scaling in terms of being CapEx efficient and understanding how do you plan out that CapEx. So it's about delivering a profitable business. One of the things I hope more founders will recognize, either they have to learn it because they are scientists, they never learn how to run a business, or they need to expand their horizon and figure out how to be a leader and actually build a much broader team, or in some cases, maybe step back, let other people run the business, right? So if you don't know something, understand your limitations, understand how you can collaborate in academic. That's not something that natural comes with research. They tend to be, I own this thing. They need to break out of that. And in order to succeed, because there's lots of times companies didn't succeed or pick the wrong way, is because they insisted on wanting to run it themselves.
Yeah, that's a challenge. It sounds like that requires a lot of coaching and being able to put the ego aside, which is, I think, challenging for a lot of people.
Very challenging.
It happens, to me as well. But I would love to know, was there a moment that inspired you to dig into postmortems of failed biotech ventures? And was there a pattern that most surprised you in this exercise? Because you mentioned a few patterns, but what was the thing that you're like, all right, we got to do this because this has to stop?
I think the biggest pattern, I have to say, and this may be something, unfortunately, I feel like this gets repeated every time. It's people who don't understand how to introduce technology, which is to go after the biggest and most commoditized market. I mean, biofuel was that way, right? And a lot of big ideas, and we talk a little bit about Silicon Valley Playbook and software. They keep talking about the biggest market. But you know what? In manufacturing, the biggest market is not your best market, because the biggest market tend to be commoditized. It's extremely cost competitive because consumers are extremely cost sensitive. And there's existing structures that already optimize the manufacturing to get to that kind of efficiency and cost. New technology rarely gets there, right? Apple didn't introduce a $100 phone, which is when Apple introduced iPhone. That was the average phone cost. Apple introduced a $600 phone, right? Tesla's first car is a $200,000 Roadster. And it's the same thing, actually. If you look at the EV, there's, lots of EVs started with, like Bolt, started with cheap cars. That is never the right strategy. Introducing a new technology and new manufacturing, that requires a lot of experiment, and which means you want to find lucrative markets and higher price markets, which is why, biomanufacturing in pharma or drug production has been successful. It's actually being more and more adopted. If you look at all the pharma players, they're all expanding biomanufacturing capacity already, right? Because it's profitable. When it makes economic sense, everybody's going to go after it. In fact, I was talking just recently with someone who commercialized BioBDO and successfully from DuPont. And that was the whole thing. He said the story when they looked at it was bio was the most economic pathway to get to what they wanted. And that's why it made sense. And now they're very, very successful. So it's very, very important to find lucrative markets so that you can actually build a business.
So you would say that, going after the biggest opportunity is a red flag.
When your cost structure or that technology is not mature to the point. And obviously, software with cost so low, now you do want to go after the biggest market, but it's timing. When do you go after the big market? What kind of risk you're taking? So you need to actually understand the risks that you're taking, and taking too many risks all at once is not a good idea because you're not going to execute well.
So in this report, you've documented 3 occurring market fit errors. So let's dig into that a little bit. So underestimating manufacturing costs is 1. 2, targeting commodity markets instead of profitable niches, which you just mentioned. And then 3 is overestimating adoption without supply chain validation. So which of these is the most seductive trap for founders, and why?
I think I'm going to repeat myself. I think going after the biggest market because the people are trained to think, oh, I'm going to pitch how big the opportunity is, right? That is one of the most seductive ones. But I will mention another one that I think is one of the reasons why they underestimate manufacturing, which is people forget, and this is one of the reasons I moved to Houston, people forget how important downstream is. Most of the biology, because a lot of these scientists are biologists, they go figure out, oh, I can get the biology so cheap. And I have this high concentration of this thing, so it should be pretty easy to get it out without really looking at understanding that full process cost and understanding what is the downstream that's actually required. And there are also sometimes even the impurities in your broth or in whatever is important for downstream manufacturing. If you have impurities that they don't know how to handle, it is very difficult to be adopted. Those are things you don't learn unless you understand manufacturing, unless you understand that downstream. So those are skill sets I think it's generally missing and not being thought through, which is one of the reasons I'm here in Houston, like I said, because guess what? There's a concentration, probably the highest concentration of downstream process engineers here in Houston, and they could really partner with the biologists and make it commercializable. And I think that that's one of the biggest gap that we need to fill to also successfully commercialize industrial biomanufacturing.
Yeah, I agree. Now, you had mentioned, and you write about this in the report, the fact that Apple's iPhone, when it came out, it was a $600 phone compared to Nokia's $100 phone. You mentioned the Tesla started off with a Roadster, very high end product. These are not commodity plays. And we have heard of companies that they try to go after that same kind of strategy, go after the niche, the high end. But how do you think bio-based material companies should think about that luxury entry point before going after mass markets?
I think there's also another philosophy that I kind of subscribe to is, as we talked about risk, we are much more interested in higher value replacement of existing, so more we call drop-in chemicals than really novel chemicals that are higher value. The reason being, as I mentioned, the supply chain to integrate a novel molecule in terms of going into final product is actually challenging. And that requires a lot more engineering and know-how into incorporate a new molecule into the downstream, even more downstream into actual products. And that often is a very, very long time. And it could take 20 years to commercialize a truly novel molecule, incorporate it into products you're in. So instead of doing that, really working on dropping chemicals, higher value chemicals that right now, like for instance, in personal care, we're seeing more and more demand for bio-based ingredients. The government is banning petroleum-based food dyes. So in food ingredients and other things, now there's opportunity to look at those existing markets where you could have a bio solution that could be even more cost competitive as well as better for human health. And those are markets I think are more lucrative for people to look at as a initial market to go after. And then as they validate their technology and understand, and in industrial engineering terms, we call it when the process is in control, which means you understand your manufacturing process. Now you're ready to scale to the next scale.
Yep. And let's talk about in this report that you flag CapEx overruns, so spending all the money and then scale up failures that have buried many of these promising companies, right? How would you advise startups to start small and prove big without falling into the capital trap?
Well, this is where, I think very different from scaling software, the playbook here, and just think about building a house. That's what I like to use an example, right? You do not want to build your house when you don't have exact engineering all done. Your wiring, almost every part of the house already engineered before you start building, because you know how expensive it would be later on to try to change it. And this is where scaling these type of technology is very different, because the manufacturing of it is not something I proved I could do kilograms. I'm going to now do hundreds of thousands of tons and build a plant on it. It doesn't work that way. I like software. We can just throw it on and scale it. So there's a lot of know-how that needs to be built and thought through and tested. So it's hard to know what you don't know, but at least you know the risks and you have a good handle on what might be the risks and have a mitigation plan. And this is where I do not encourage startups to try to build their own plant. When many of the failures was because these startups were trying to build their own plant. I think it is much more important to partner with someone who knows how to build a plant, who built plants before, and that commercial partnership is really important. This is also why we believe working with the corporate to start at that process. And we have a portfolio company that already announced a partnership with a large chemical player that they will be the people to build the plant. They'll license the technology. So there's alternative arrangements or partnership that you could look at to work with existing players. First of all, and in addition, you de-risk the construction. You also de-risk your capital, because with large players, now you have other ways of financing that plant. Because large players usually are public companies or much more credible bankable companies. They can access much cheaper capital to build it as well instead of equity. So equity doesn't have to take on the risk. Those are things I think it's really important for startups to think through, how instead of thinking about, I'm going to do everything you, and in fact, you mentioned it. It's much more important to think about all the partnerships that you could build and leverage people's strength to get there and not try to do it all by yourself.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And I mean, we're seeing more of this because there is more opportunity to partner, particularly on the biomanufacturing side. Maybe early days, that wasn't as easy as it is now. And as you said, corporates are probably more willing to do those kinds of partnerships and maybe take on some of the costs that is associated with building a bigger facility. Now, this is in stark contrast to Silicon Valley's fast moving, low CapEx model, which doesn't work for biomanufacturing. What's the alternative? How should patient capital be structured for these deep tech, capital intensive ventures?
I think there are three things for them to think about. One is this, because the scaling is very different. It's not kind of a smooth curve. It's more of a step function. We build, test, and then we get to this scale. Now we can replicate a plant at this scale. To get to the next scale, we need to take some time to plan it and test it and make sure we're okay. Then we plan it, then we build it. So it's much more of a staircase kind of growth. It's important for capital to understand that and understand in that staircase, what are the risks that you're taking out? Not to say the top line, it's not the top line revenue, but it's the risk they're taking out in that when it's flat on the revenue, but those steps you're taking. So you're prepared to get on to the next step up. That's one thing. Second, I think it's also thinking about how do you create, as you de-risk, how do you really leverage capital, the variety of sources of capital, right? There's, as we talked about, there's asset. Because we're building asset, therefore you can actually access leasing arrangements or project finance if you have offtake agreements. Those are all non-dilutive fundings. Don't just think equity. Equity is one of the sources. There's a lot of other source of capital that you could leverage and partner with other people. And the last thing, actually, it's kind of an interesting one that we are in a point of in time. We talk about America is about making things again. We're reindustrialization of America. There is actually increasing government funding, and especially from DoD, and 4 of my portfolio companies are actually have some DoD level funding, that we are wanting to have domestic capacity on these strategic chemicals. So I think there is opportunity to leverage those undiluted dollars from government as well. There's an opportunity to deploy significant capital, create that economic case in terms of work, jobs, and economic development argument to access those government. And it used to be hard, and a lot of people prefer not to get government because you're actually encumbered by this and that. But that happens in research. But in these CapEx type of credit vehicles, this could be really accelerating the growth and actually de-risking the equity capital. So I think that's a really interesting source to work with government.
So let's talk about this report again, because I really appreciate the fact that it had varying perspectives and it could be helpful to different people, from founders, biotech innovators, people that look to purchase biofuels or specialty chemicals, platform chemicals, and of course, investors, right? There's investors that are very interested in getting into this space, and they have capital and they want to spend it. And founders themselves want to be able to bring along the right investor. So the report talks about the need for smart money, which you mentioned earlier. So smart money investors who bring more than cash. So what distinguishes an investor who really supports a company from one that accidentally writes its obituary? Still sticking to the Halloween theme here.
I like to think one of the things I like to kind of make an analogy, right? It's like in sports, we have baseball, football, soccer. They're all sort of sports, right? But the playbook is very different in terms of how you play. Right? And venture is the same thing because it's different tech. So it's really important, I think, for this particular space for people who understand how manufacturing scales. not people who scaled only software, because like I said, it's very different from scaling software. And it's also, I think, really important to understand Silicon Valley. There's a thing about velocity and pivoting and thinking that's like a huge advantage. I don't debate that velocity is important because you want to see execution. But the type of velocity that we're talking about, as I mentioned, it's about what risks are you taking out in some cases. It's not velocity in revenue or velocity in how quickly you pivot. Because if you didn't think through, like we said, building that house, and every time you pivot, it's a very expensive pivot in hardware. So, we say that, if you plan it well, actually, the execution will be a lot smoother. So sometimes it's about taking the time. And that's where you don't press for velocity on maybe what's visible, but making sure, helping them to de-risk so that when they execute, it is smooth. And then you're actually using that capital much more efficiently, and it actually creates better return.
Before I ask the next question, Veronica, I want to pick up on something you said, because you said, I'm not going to summarize it the right way, but you said something about hardware. Do you think that is this kind of biomanufacturing more analogous to hardware manufacturing than it is pharmaceutical manufacturing? Is that an analogy that maybe needs to be made?
I think so. And I think pharmaceutical is different in the sense I would say it's more analogous to maybe large scale manufacturing, because we are talking about hundreds of millions of tons, and we're not talking about just a few thousand tons, right? Pharmaceutical, one of the nice things about pharmaceutical, I think we did a rough back of the envelope to inoculate everybody in the world, like COVID, 13 billion people, 13 billion shots, 3 shots a person. It's, you're talking about a few thousand tons of vaccine. That's it, a couple thousand tons. You don't need a whole lot of material. But the type of chemicals and things that we're talking about, you're talking about at least hundreds of thousands of tons. If not, ultimately, these commodities, we're talking about hundreds of millions of tons, right? So the order of magnitude is much, much more different. And when you get to that kind of order of magnitude, the manufacturing excellence and efficiency becomes very, very important. And designing a manufacturing plant, if you will, or process for that kind of scale, it's a science on its own.
Yeah, it's super interesting. I think the analogy we've heard is that all biopharmaceuticals wouldn't even fit an Olympic-sized swimming pool. That's the volume, and yet the value is orders of magnitude. It's like $600 billion. It's some enormous number. So volume is what makes it interesting. You're using very small amounts of these proteins or therapeutics, and yet the value is so great. And industrial biomanufacturing is very different. So failures, which the report talks about, can feel like ghosts that haunt founders. What are some of the specters of the past that you still see lingering in biotech pitches or investor decks? Are founders learning from the graveyard, or do you think they're still repeating the same mistakes?
I think some founders are starting to learn. There's definitely still that I'm seeing a general, less so. People are moving away from a general platform to say my molecule can do everything, right? They are starting to focus on what is the market and the value that my technology can help. So we're seeing some changes in that, and people are starting to drop that platform idea and realizing that's not really a good pitch, because that means you don't know what you can do with your technology. Actually, the challenge that we're seeing is still, I would say, the downplaying of DSP. I still see that quite often. People say, "Oh, I can get biology to work," and they don't. They're still not thinking through the full downstream, underestimating the cost of that. There is still a lot of, in terms of, especially from lab to manufacturing, because part of it is we're seeing people trying to improve the technical economic analysis, but building a plant. And when you have a plant, you have insurance and other things that needs to be incorporated into those analysis that basically when you're a lab, you don't need to think about. Those tend to be things that's still overlooked even in their technical economic analysis. So there are still things like that that basically underestimates the actual competitiveness of the technology when it turns into a commercialized product. We're seeing it's getting better, but it's not quite there yet, I would say. The last thing, like I said, there's still quite a bit of mentality that I see, and this is talking about people again, is that I build it, they will come. And that just isn't going to work, right? And you have to work with other people, and not recognizing that ego problem, I think, is something we really need to work at for a lot of these founders to understand. You need to build a team, and where they're not good, how to build a team that's complementary and then helps them to expand. It's not about focusing on the technology. It is about how do you build the right partnerships? How do you risk the scaling that's going to make you successful? So it's one man show is not going to be what's get funded. And I have founders who point out, oh, that they don't have the right technology, raise this much money. How come I have a better technology? I can't raise them. Well, it's you. It's just that simple, right? Because you can't build a team. And so nobody believes that, we use sports and it takes a team. We need a pitcher. We need baseball. We need the second baseman, shortstop. We need catcher, right? There are different roles on the team. And if you can't build a team, you're not going to be successful. We can't win baseball with just a pitcher.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's something that we see too. A company is people, and your team is your internal team, but you look at the team as, there's external team members, like you're saying, like the strategic partners. Look at your customers as a part of your team. They're the ones who are going to be using your product. They're the ones who need it to be a certain way in order to love it. And so I just love the fact that you're pointing that out. It's not just technology is the thing that's doing the sales, right? It's people and how you position it. I mean, that's what we talk a lot about at Messaging Lab. But I will say that this report wasn't all doom and gloom. Yes, even though there are some challenges and that there has been these failures, quote unquote, in the graveyard, the report really ends on an optimistic note. It says there's no better time to invest in industrial biomanufacturing. So can you tell us, like, what makes this moment different from the hype cycles that have filled the graveyard in the past? And how do we ensure that this wave doesn't end up as Graveyard 2.0? Hopefully we're not writing another report next year.
I think there's three fundamental changes in the market that's helping us. We talked about the cost and the speed. And so the cost is even lowered from the last 2 decades, right? And then it's exponential. So it's not just, it's not even 10x. We're talking about 1,000x, things like that. So that's one. So the cost is coming down. The second thing I think is really worth noting is I think green premium, as we talk about it, doesn't exist. And I would argue health premium does exist. So increasingly, consumers are becoming more aware of all these chemicals, microplastics, forever chemicals, all the negativism associated with petroleum-based chemicals. Even the government starts to take action, right? We're looking at RFK starting to talk about make America healthy again. And so we're going to ban food dye. So the industry is going through consumers going through a recognition that for my own health, I want to choose a healthier alternative. And that's a bio-based alternative that could be better for me. So there's a demand in the market, and there is a premium, actually. In fact, more and more people I talk to are looking at the labels and start to say, well, there's too many things I can't pronounce. I don't want to buy it. So that is happening. So you have prices, actually, you have a market that's demanding it. Before, I think we're trying to create a gray market for people to want it. Now there is a market that consumer actually want it, and there's increasingly more people willing to pay a premium for it, and the cost is coming down. So now there's an economic case. Guess what? It's actually a profitable market. And we are seeing niche players who are leveraging this biopolymer, and they're profitable. They're growing. So now capital at the end of the day is looking for returns. So it is now actually profitable to enter this market. And finally, like I said, I think we as a country start to realize we need to make things, because if we don't, we're at the mercy of some countries that are not very friendly to us, that we could have serious issues, right? Over 50% of the chemicals are produced by one country. And we all know what that country is, and that's not a friend of ours. So I think there's increasing awareness that we need to, for supply chain resilience, for our national security, we need to have domestic manufacturing. And guess what? Who wants to bring the dirty old petrochemical back that like creates carcinogen and all that kind of stuff? No. And biomanufacturing is a truly option for getting to these chemicals without toxicity. The process is not toxic. So I think increasingly the government, all the funding that's supporting the reindustrialization of America is also available to further de-risk some of the first of its kind plants, right? And that's going to make it more attractive for people to take risks, or capital, private capital, to unlock, to take on the risk. So I think now the general economics for a case for biomanufacturing is just starting to develop, that it becomes an attractive sector to be deploying capital.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would say, like, what are your thoughts about this fourth area of why we should be investing in industrial biomanufacturing on the innovation side of higher performance molecules, right? We can have some novel experiences with products if they can be biomanufactured. I'd love for you to comment on performance too, because I know that you've worked with some amazing companies.
I think performance is going to come next. That's like what I believe. It's still going to take a little time to prove higher performance, because like I said, higher performance, the downstream takes a while to adopt. So I think it's the next, if you will, as we build the first set of these and get these first set of molecules out there and to biomanufacture to prove that it is economic return, and the next step will naturally be higher performance. And that's something that I kind of believe.
What do you think the future looks like, Veronica? If we look 10 years in the future, what does a resurrected bioeconomy look like to you? What needs to rise from the grave to make biomanufacturing truly scalable and sustainable?
I hope there's more. I think what is going to be really interesting is one of the things you guys mentioned, like bioeconomy just becomes part of the economy, that just like bio-based chemical just becomes a natural part of, instead of we talk about petrochemical, when we talk about chemical, bio-based chemical becomes the chemicals that we use every day. So we really, and in fact, there are already a lot of bio-based chemicals that we use today. It's just they're not known as bio-based chemicals, right? And in a lot of food ingredients, in fragrances, things like that, it's already bio-based. But more and more, we hope a lot of the materials that we use becomes bio-based. And in the end, that people just don't talk about bio-based. These are just materials. And when we know, and they should be from bio-based materials, because they provide humanity with the greatest benefit.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting, the term bio-based, because, in the world of personal care and beauty, they look at like plant extracts as bio-based, but we're using it as biomanufactured, like being manufactured. And so I think it's interesting to see on the marketing side how we navigate the difference between extracted, plant-based, extracted versus biomanufactured, and how we educate the consumers to know the difference. Because you can have a plant extract that has all sorts of things going on. I know like oak moss is like an allergen to people, and there are certain things that are endocrine disruptors, which is like a big thing. You mentioned microplastics. People are starting to look at endocrine disruptors, so EDs. But it's something that I think we should talk about as we talk more downstream in sales, which we'll love to chat about with you on that front too.
Okay, so now we're going to get into the fun part of the interview. I know you've just been waiting for this. We're going to get into the quick fire questions here. I'll go first. Veronica, what's one outdated idea in biomanufacturing that you wish the industry would finally lay to rest?
I think biofuel. We should just stop talking about biofuel and focus our energy. Maybe eventually we'll get there, but right now, let's just not.
Yeah. Okay. Well, then I'm not going to ask the next one because I know your answer, which was biofuels, biomaterials, or bioplastics. Which sector will rise from the grave first? Actually, it's a different question.
Yeah, I think biomaterials could be the first one, actually, because I think people are looking for alternative ways of materials that are not toxic so that they can be comfortable. We can, when we're wearing clothes or whatever, that we know there's no microplastic going off to the environment that's going to go back to our bodies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Amazing.
What's the biggest horror story you've seen in biomanufacturing?
Interesting. I think I would say there were a lot. I mean, we saw definitely in the last wave is companies that went public without revenue. That I think really destroyed this industry, right? Because I think once you become a public company, you get coverage, you get a lot of more visibility. And when you default, that is not a great example for investors to look for. And it doesn't help the industry very much, right? So to me, I hope we do less of that and have more profitable companies that can truly show we can make money for investors.
Yeah, I wonder, I mean, sorry, before we go on to the next one, I just wonder if that's like a legacy of biopharma, because most biopharma companies that go public, they don't have revenue. It's an expectation based on a pipeline, and which is perhaps a pipe dream.
Yeah.
We've come up across so many of them during the course of our career where it's just like, man, you could have waited a little bit longer, but you had to go public.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I hear you.
So, yeah, I think for definitely for industrial biomanufacturing, because the scale that we're talking about is so different that you need to make sure they overcome the manufacturing, because the manufacturing is when the rubber really hits the road, is when you actually have a product.
Yeah. Amazing. All right. Okay. Here we go. So, one industry term you'd love to bury forever.
Synthetic biology.
Oh, all right.
Snap.
We got
Wow.
to talk to John Cumbers about that too, because
Okay.
I'm a big fan. I'm a big fan of removing it or changing it, because people they think synthetic, they think biology, think Terminator 2.
Yes.
Or
Yes.
T2000 or whatever. So, yeah.
Okay, if the bio industry were a monster movie, Veronica, would it be Frankenstein, Dracula, or the Blob, and why?
Dracula, because we'll re-rise. You can't kill us.
Unless you have garlic or sunlight.
Or a wooden stake.
Actually, there's a lot of ways.
Or it's very hard to kill.
Yeah.
We'll keep coming back.
Yes, yeah, we'll keep coming back. Oh, this is amazing. Oh, I loved it. Thank you so much for writing that report. I feel like a lot of people needed to read it. They needed to hear it. And, failure isn't a horrible thing. Sometimes we need to see someone took a risk, someone made decisions, they tried. And we know that that's not the way to do it. And so we really appreciate that they took the time to look at the industry from that lens and share it with everybody.
Yeah. And for better and for worse, people should know Tesla isn't the first electric vehicle company. It's the 27th, I think. Someone counted for me. And so being the first isn't necessarily the best way to go after a market anyways. And failures pave the way for success. So this is why we think this is also the best time to, because there's so much expensive lessons learned. Now we can be so much better and smarter at attacking it.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And then since this is a Halloween episode, what are you going to be for Halloween, or doing anything for Halloween?
I am actually going out with my little niece, and she's dressed up as a princess, a mermaid. So we're going to go trick or treating.
Oh,
That's
nice.
fun.
That will be a lot of fun. You can see all the candy that we should replace with bio-based or bio-manufactured dyes, at least.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Veronica. It's been such a pleasure to have you come back on. We will put the report in the show notes. We've been sharing it with people. I think we've written about it. We think it's very important for others to read. We mentioned it on our episode, which is a report on reports. And we're looking forward to talking to you and continuing this conversation. So can't wait to have you on Grow Everything again.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it, guys. This has been fun.
Hey, this episode is sponsored by Messaging Lab. At Messaging Lab, we translate complex science and economics into compelling business narratives. And we have done so for the most successful biotech forward companies across pharma, agriculture, personal care and beauty, materials, and the list goes on. We're here to make sure your ideas not only get heard, but resonate with your audience. So if it's time to amplify your company's voice and elevate your business, visit us at messaginglab.com. Let's grow. All right, Carl, what'd you think about that episode?
Veronica makes so many good points, and the report, I think, is very much worth reading. It speaks to a lot of the topics that we talk about here on Grow Everything. I think one of the big ones that Veronica mentioned is that people still don't know how to introduce their technology to the market. They often think that the biggest market is their right market. That might not be the best market. And she did make the point, and we've heard this before, and we've said it before, that sometimes it's better to go after the niche market, the one where you can make more money, like Tesla did with a Roadster. It might be smaller, but it allows you to prove your technology. It maybe allows you to create some pilots with people. And I think that that's just a welcome reminder that people should think about.
Yeah, the whole idea of scaling, like you don't need to go from 0 to 100, right? Go to 0 to 20, find that niche market, then scale to that level. Because it's super scary raising a whole bunch of money and then spending that money on things that you may not need. And it's like before you scale your infrastructure and your technology, scale your relationships and understanding of the market. Get buyers before you even start putting steel in the ground. Like let's just take a beat and figure out, like, can we get buyers first? What do they actually need? And then start scaling your technology, because you'll know exactly what your customers are looking for, whether they are business customers, like if you're selling within an industry or you're selling into the consumer market. You can talk to people. We have all the tools. We have podcasts, we have social media, surveys. There's so many ways to get in front of large groups of people, and making it sound easier said than done, but it's also hard raising, hundreds of millions of dollars. So what hard thing should someone do first? That's the question.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's instructive to go back to the report because it also goes back to what Bill Morrill had said a while ago, that failure is not usually the science. And in the report, the team at First Byte makes the point that 80% of failures targeted low margin commodity markets like biofuels and platform chemicals, where biomanufacturing can't compete with petroleum incumbents, at least not yet. And so it's not that the science has been wrong in these failures. It's just that scaling biomanufacturing is challenging and it's different. And so you better be scaling for the right kind of end product. Because if you can't make a profit of it, it's not necessarily going to be a good thing to try to scale to, millions of liters.
Yep. Yep. That's right. And the whole idea, at least in the world of biomanufacturing and other products, is like there's that finished product. And there are so many variables in that. And that finished product, Veronica referred to that as downstream processing. Oftentimes in biomanufacturing, we refer to getting to that, final phase. That I don't want to call it the last mile, but the last 10 miles. That requires a lot of economics to be done. And people downplay it. It's like, all right, we're going to focus on the first part of the innovation, and then we can focus on that. The rest is going to be easy when it's just, maybe it's easy, but it could be costly. So it's figuring out how to get those costs down, which, something that you can do using a lot of tools out there. Veronica mentioned the techno-economic analysis. There's also the life cycle analysis to understand sustainability. Amazing tools. And there's some that are publicly available. We can link to those in the show notes. And if you're someone that wants to play around and think, you have an idea and you want to do some calculations on it, it's a great tool to use.
I would just like to end on a positive note regarding both Veronica and the report, because the report does end up optimistic. And, she says there's no better time to invest in or focus on biomanufacturing. And at the same time, that we're putting this podcast out, the latest Chinese, 15-year plan came out. And since the 1980s, China has consistently elevated the role of biotech in their 5-year plans. And the latest one, the one that just came out, as we're recording this, really talked a lot about self-reliance and innovation, and biotech was one of the things mentioned. And the way it's mentioned reminds me of what we talk about a lot on this podcast, that biomanufacturing allows you to localize manufacturing. It allows you to be innovative. It's a very high tech manufacturing method. It requires a certain kind of infrastructure. And if you're going to distribute biological manufacturing, then you have to connect those things digitally. So there's a lot of opportunity there. And I appreciate that, Veronica mentioned it, and we can see that the Chinese are saying the same thing.
Yeah, yeah. And hopefully the US is listening. I mean, we need to get out there. We got to talk to more people, hopefully get more listeners. You are listening. You, the listener, listening right now. Please share this so people can understand that we need a rally. We need to rally around biomanufacturing. It is a great tool to use in order to have products made locally. That is the theme, I guess you can say, of this administration, America First. So let's leverage that and figure it out. I mean, it's again easier said than done, but I think we can connect the resources. You, the listener, can connect them. It's all about connecting together different resources we have in the United States. And there's a lot. And to be able to just manufacture things locally. So hopefully we can be a part of that, Carl. I mean, hopefully people are listening. It's scary if they're not. I got to continue with the Halloween theme. Because what are we doing this for? We've been doing it for 3 years.
Yeah, exactly. I just want to do a self plug. I'm going to be appearing at TEDx Boston on November 16th. It's the second day of a Planet Action focused TEDx. There's a couple of people who've been on the podcast that are going to be there as well. Our friend Julia Marsh will be there, Chris Mason, local here in Brooklyn, and Ginger Dozier, who's been on the podcast 2 times, are also going to be appearing at this TEDx, along with yours truly. And I can talk a little bit about what I'm going to be highlighting when I'm there, maybe on the next episode.
Ooh, okay. All right. Cliffhanger. We'll stay tuned and hear more about it. But excited for you, Carl. And don't forget to give a shout out to the Grab Everything podcast.
I won't.
Great.
It's in the bio already.
Oh, perfect. Great. All right. Well, thank you everyone for listening to the Grab Everything podcast. Please like, subscribe. If you're watching this on YouTube, hello, I'm waving to you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, please subscribe on YouTube and leave a comment. We actually got a really great comment last week. Should I mention that?
Yes, please.
Someone who said that we're making the world a better place. So it warmed my heart. And they didn't really, it was hard to know who that person was, but it really, your comments mean the world to us. Thank you.
Yes, yes. And for those that just like to get information in their inbox so you can review it on your own time, we do have a Substack as well. So we're getting out there. So whatever channel you prefer, we're there. If we're not, let us know. We'll get there. We'll get you this content wrapped up nicely in a little package delivered directly to you. So just give us a shout out. But thanks again for listening.
Thank you. And that's the pod.